Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for apologies there. I got a bit of feedback on my speakers, so I thought it'd be better just to shut off and start again. So thank you very much for joining me, everyone. My name is Richard from the Seneca team, and we're really excited today to see so many people joining us for this session looking at leadership through COVID-19. It's great to see such a wide variety of weather going on across the country in the chat. I feel like I don't need to look at the weather today anymore because I know what's going on across the whole country, which is brilliant. And it's great to see so many people connecting with people that they know through the chat as well. Now, we've got three brilliant speakers today. I'm going to show you the timings and the rundown of how that's going to work in a second. But please do continue those conversations on the chat. But you can also continue the conversation through Twitter as well. So we have the hashtag SenecaCPD running today, and that will help you just to continue the conversation through this conference, but also beyond that as well. So to carry on the ideas and themes that are picked up, so you can carry on talking about them beyond this session. So keep that going. We were very pleased last time we did one of these conferences. We got trending number 3 on Twitter, which was fantastic. Be great if we could go one further today and try and get even higher than that in the trending stakes, to have people prioritizing CPD on a Saturday morning, and that getting to number 3 on Twitter was brilliant to see. So let me give you a rundown of the different of what's happening in today's conference. We're going to be running, as you can see at the times at the bottom of your screen, 9:30 until midday today. And as I say, we've got 3 brilliant speakers lined up for you. So the first speaker you will hear from is Mary Myatt. She's going to be talking to us about her 3 elements to support leadership during COVID-19. And that's going to happen at, well, very shortly, just as soon as I've finished with this talk. And for each speaker, we're going to have an opportunity to give you a chance to ask some questions. And the way that will work is through the chat on Zoom. So the chat that lots of people are already using, which is brilliant, is there available. So when the talks start, if you have questions that you want to ask at the end of each session, just pop your questions in there. And what I'll do is I'll collate them as we go. And then in the sort of Q&A period at the end of each talk, I'll basically pull out some key themes, some key questions from the questions that are in that chat. So if you want to get your questions in, do that there. But also don't forget, obviously, if you want to tweet them directly and ask some questions as well, I'll share their various Twitter handles during the session. So after Mary's talk and her Q&A, we're going to have a short 15-minute break, and then we're going to move on to hear from Sam Strickland, who's going to be talking about leading in a time of uncertainty. And again, that's going to be followed by a Q&A session. And then after that, at around 11:10, we're going to hear from Kat Howard about workload reduction during the pandemic. So 3 really interesting, exciting talks we're going to hear from our 3 keynotes today. And we're hoping to be wrapped up just before 12, but there's a bit of planning time just in case we run over there as well. So without further ado, what I am going to do is I'm going to hand over to Mary. Hopefully she's ready to steal the screen from me. So over to you, Mary.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me. Can you hear me and see me, Richard?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great to be with you. Already lots of lovely chat within the chat box, so that's great. Keep that going. So just 3 things I'm going to be sharing with you as we think about the trials and tribulations that there are of leadership during these current times. So the first is about why I think it's important that we have our own masks on first. The second is just a few thoughts on the difference between activity and productivity. And then third, some candidates for what we might cut. So the first then, to be thinking about why we need our own masks on first. I think this applies to everyone in the sector at the moment, but I think even in normal times, I just think that the work that goes on in schools is so demanding, exhilarating, but takes its toll. And we all remember the time when we were able to take aeroplane flights, and in the safety instructions, we were always told in case of emergency, if we were traveling with someone who was either vulnerable or a young child, that we were to put our own masks on first. So why was that? Well, it's because we can't look after other people and take care of them if we haven't taken care of ourselves first. So there's a real temptation, I think, in these times just to keep going. And I just don't think that is realistic at all. So there are three things I think that it's important to do. The first is to make sure that we get enough sleep. So unless our sleep is interrupted by little people or for some other reason, I think for those of us for whom that's not the case, we should be getting to bed in reasonable time so that we are sufficiently rested for the next day. The second is making sure we eat on a regular basis. And the third is to get a bit of fresh air every day. There's huge amounts of evidence that these really do make a difference. And I think we've got to be quite intentional about this at the moment, because with so much going on, we just need to pause every now and then to make sure that we're okay. Rest, as Greg McKeown says, the great thinker on essentialism, whose work I draw on a great deal, he says, rest is a responsibility. Rest is a responsibility. It's not being self-indulgent, folks. It's not a luxury. So I think anyone in schools at the moment, with everything that's going on, needs to really take that on board. What follows from that is that I'm working with lots of settings where people are concerned that they're not as far ahead as they would like to be on some of the plans they had, either to refine or develop their curriculum or other aspects of school provision because of what's happened this year. And I just think we have to live with that, because those extra areas that we want to develop, they're still going to be there when this ghastly time is over. So we just do what we can, but we don't beat ourselves up. So, you know, nobody's going to die if a new curriculum plan hadn't been put in place by the deadline we'd set ourselves. It's about really being realistic. And the reason I'm really talking about this a lot in all the pieces of work that I do is because all the arrangements around lockdown and the pressures of not knowing what's happening moment by moment is unbelievably time consuming and taking up a lot of headspace. We only have so much bandwidth, and so got to be realistic about that. But the work that's going on in schools around safeguarding arrangements, children in and out, staff self-isolating, children needing to self-isolate, this is safeguarding. And what underpins all our work is safeguarding. So at the moment, that does have to take priority. So I always say to people, you know, do what you can on the other things, but, you know, this work is not going to go away. So let's just relax into that. So, and to remind ourselves that we simply cannot do everything. We simply can't do everything, so let's try. And what we need to be moving on to is the disciplined pursuit of less. So I'm just going to be asking the question whether we are focused on activity or productivity. And I'm talking about in normal times. I'm not talking about now. There's lots of activity that's got to go on, and that's just how it is. But I think by and large, we need to be paying more attention to being mindful of the difference. There's a big distinction between the two. And I think sometimes we can get caught into the trap of thinking, well, I've been very busy. Yes, but what impact did it have? So we've got to cut the link between activity automatically meaning productivity. And we've just got to stop trying to do everything. We've got to stop and think about the impact of everything that we're doing and whether it's worth putting the effort in for what outcome. So I'm just going to say a few words about some thinkers that I've found helpful as I clarify my own work in this regard. And the first is Greg McKeown, who I've already mentioned, and his work on essentialism. And this is deep, but also simple, purposeful work that we've got to be asking ourselves on a regular basis, what is the point at which my work and my input can make the highest contribution? To be really thinking through, what is it that I'm working on now or giving to my classes that's going to have the greatest impact? But more widely, in terms of some of the systems and structures that we have in schools, to be asking that same question. At a more philosophical level, Greg talks about, this bigger question of, what is my purpose in life? And that's all extremely interesting. And when you've got an alignment of the two, of what we're meant to be doing with our lives, and then translate that into our work, I think that can be really productive. I do recommend his work and also his podcasts. The second strand of my thinking has been informed by the Pareto principle. So Pareto was a professor, an Italian professor working in the University of Lausanne in the late 1890s. And his research was on the land ownership in Italy. And what he found was that 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the population. And he found that that was true across many countries and many areas as well. But he also went on to wonder whether this might apply to other fields as well. And it turns out that it does. So both his work and subsequently taken up by a lot of leadership and thinkers who've done extensive work on this and research on this, is that it turns out that across all sectors, whether they're public organizations, including education or in business, that 80% of the output or the impact comes from 20% of the input. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but I think what we can take from that is that there are some things in our practices that have a far greater impact than others. And so this comes back to the disciplined pursuit of less. We're going to have to focus on those things and pay great attention to the things that have the greatest impact. So given everything that's going on, this is even more important now. The third person I'm referring to is Marie Kondo, and I'm sure some of you will have heard of her decluttering work. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there's some deep stuff sitting behind that, in that, she asks ourselves the question, do I really need this in my life? Does it spark joy? And I think there's some mileage in asking ourselves that in terms of the work that we do in schools. And I'm particularly thinking of the work that we offer our children. Does it spark joy in me giving this to children, or is it less than good, really? And is it going to spark the same with them? This isn't a flippant, fun activity kind of thing. This is about material being really deeply worthwhile for our children. I included that tongue in cheek, but I was talking about this a while ago, and apparently there's a department at Harvard University, the educational faculty there, that's doing some work on the Kondo curriculum on the same idea. So it is being taken seriously in quarters. But essentially, we've got quite a few bloated aspects of provision within the sector. I think that we are quite conservative as a sector. And I think that we could do with a jolly good spring clean on some of these, and asking ourselves whether they're really adding greatest value to what we're doing. Underpinning this are the notions. If we're going to have some of these conversations, they need to be frank. They need to be underpinned by professional candor. I draw a lot on Kim Scott's radical candor, which is very helpful. There shouldn't be any beating about the bush, but it's about doing it in a way that is both robust and kind, both to ourselves and to our colleagues, obviously. So what this means when we're in this space of considering activity and productivity is it does mean that there's going to be, if we're going to set some priorities, there's going to be some trade-offs. There will be some trade-offs. And psychologically, this is difficult because we tend to want to be able to do everything, but we can't. And I wrote a blog recently, done is better than perfect. And this idea that I've got to do everything to a really high pitch. No, it just needs to be done. And to as high standards as we possibly can. And those standards are going to be higher if we're working on fewer things. But this is an important point, that if we're going to prioritize some elements of our work over others, it means we've got to become comfortable with saying, well, we're not doing this because, okay, and I think as a sector, because we're all very well intentioned, because we all work hard, I think we need to beef up our capacity to do that. Obviously not in relation to things like safeguarding, obviously, but we will have established that's a priority, but it's in some of the other areas that I think we need to be asking ourselves this question. And so what follows from that is asking ourselves what adds greatest value. I'm arguing that what adds greatest value is a high quality curriculum. All sorts of evidence around that, and we think we all know that as a sector. And so we need to be thinking, well, what is it then that is going to make the most difference as we're thinking about the curriculum? Now, funnily enough, when we get our heads around some of this, it's less work. It's less work for the professionals. That's not why we do it. We do it because some ways of working are actually have greater impact on student and pupil learning. So then, you know, this notion of trying to find fewer things in greater depth so that we move away from activity to focusing on productivity, it's really helpful to turn to some of the headlines of research, which I'm just going to take very quickly because I think they're familiar to most people on this call. They're not familiar to everyone in the sector, though. But just to remind ourselves of the power of some of the research that is coming out and has been coming out for some time, that we might take on board in a way that is fit for purpose for our context. It's not a 3-line whip, the material that's coming out of cognitive science. We absorb what's appropriate for our contexts. So Dan Willingham, first of all, familiar to many of us, foundational work, I think, in terms of setting out the findings from cognitive science. He and his colleagues, those that are likely to make most difference to learning. So I'm just going to take some headlines from these because, you know, I think these are incredibly helpful as we refine our work. So the first thing he says is that human beings are curious. Great. So let's remember that when we're planning anything for our children in relation to the curriculum, that if it's well planned, we might want to ask ourselves the question, the extent to which we're provoking curiosity in our children. But thinking is hard. Yes, it is, but it's good hard. So a bit of a Twitter conversation before we came on here with a couple of people who'd also been out for a run this morning in the dreary weather, and you don't feel like doing it first thing on a Saturday morning, but you feel great when you're done. And I think it's the same here in terms of thinking being hard work. You might not necessarily want to embark on it, but there's a deep sense of satisfaction when you have completed it. We have got this also evidenced by children who are asking for more demanding texts. I don't have time now to give the examples of children saying they want more demanding texts, but they do. Just take it for my word, they do. So what happens when we give children more demanding texts? We've got an example here from Richard Kennett, Ken Radical on the Twitters, absolutely brilliant, do follow him. Here we've got a lesson where children are being taught about the Norman Conquest, Year 7, mixed prior attainment, and Richard has given them a demanding text about the Norman Conquest from Mark Morris. So the children are told, well, you can see what it says, testing out the scholarship reading homework. Even those with a reading age below 10 could access it. Clearly, we need to have higher expectations of these children. So the whole class is getting extracts from Mark Morris's account of the Norman Conquest, a demanding text. Richard says your job for homework is to read these passages and answer all the questions. He then goes on to say, don't worry, this is supposed to be hard, so don't worry if you can't complete them all. So this demanding work, linking back to Dan Willingham's insight, means that if it's set in a context of low threat, so it's high challenge, low threat, children can access it. This starts making our work incredibly efficient, finding some great text reading to children. And then in the lessons, they're comparing that with Simon Shamer's account of the Norman Conquest. Why? Because he wants them understanding that while there might be historical events, which are uncontested. Historians disagree about the significance of those. Yeah, A-level stuff in year 7. Okay, so we're getting huge amounts of value out of something as simple as this. Year 6, sorry, Ashley Booth, year 6. Do follow him, Mr. Booth, year 6. Why does he love whole class reading so much? Because a child who would have long been considered low ability in inverted commas can access texts like The Caged Bird by Maya Angelou with their peers. And subsequently, that great educational term, bang out stuff like this. Now, the child's clearly been supported, but what's going on here is their own voice and ideas are coming through in relation to the conditions for the bird trapped in the cage and the conditions of a large proportion of American society in the 1950s and 60s, live and sensitive still today. So here we've got this thread then going through from the insight from cognitive science. Human beings are curious, children are curious, thinking is hard, but they're saying they want demanding texts and just look at what they are doing. Supported too by the fact that the next element, our brain's privilege story. So that was what was going on in both of those events, as well as the demanding texts, but a terrific insight, which I think has huge impact in terms of the 80-20 principle. Fewer things, greater depth. This insight from Dan Willingham, our brain's privilege story, our brain's privilege story. Picked up by Steven Pinker, world-renowned cognitive scientist. Cognitive psychology has shown that the mind best understands facts when they're woven into a conceptual fabric, such as a narrative, mental map, or intuitive theory. Disconnected facts in the mind are like unlinked pages on the web. They might as well not exist. So very helpful for us in terms of finding the things that add the greatest value. Supported too by Marianne Wolf's work, Proust and the Squid, the science, story and science of the reading brain. Human beings invented reading only a few thousand years ago. And after this invention, we rearranged the very organization of our brain, which in turn expanded, that should be the ways we were able to think, which altered the intellectual evolution of our species. Reading makes us cleverer, bottom line. Okay, however, so this is urgent, it's important because we've had a report in the last month from Oxford University Press, Bridging the Word Gap at Transition, big gaps. So we need to pay attention to this. Most efficient way is to develop this through high quality text. So that's from Oxford University Press in association with the Centre for Education and Youth. But we've also got to pay attention to the reading deficit, okay? Over a quarter of our children didn't reach the expected standard for the last year for which we have data. Only about 30% of children are read to daily at home. And from Teacher Tapp from a couple of years ago, only 15% of year 4 teachers read to their classes every day. I think there might be a link, colleagues. This is not to have a go at year 4 teachers. This is about a sector that does not take reading seriously, either at home or in schools. I think they are a bit more now, but it's not yet universal. So if we're trying to get more bang for our buck, which is that way around, we've got to take this seriously. There's some barriers though. We don't do enough reading, which is why it's important we pay attention to this. One of the reasons we don't is because it's enjoyable. What have I done if I'm reading a text to my children? It's really enjoyable. It's what Claire Seeley calls the collective cuddle. We've all experienced that. This is a problem because we think it can't be work. Colleagues, it is work, which is why I've laboured the cognitive science. This is secondary as well as primary. There's time. So what have I done to prepare for that lesson? I found a good text like Richard did and Ashley Booth did. And I've probably identified some vocabulary that I want to develop before, or maybe pre-teach some of the vocab or pick it up for discussion in the class. What I've not done, colleagues, is work till midnight preparing half a dozen differentiated worksheets that are going to widen gaps. This is a classic example of the Pareto rule, McCann's work, Kondo's work. We focus on the things that have the greatest impact, as we're going to see. And then there's an issue of evidence. You know, what does it look as though children are doing? If someone comes into my lesson and I'm reading a book, doesn't look as though they're doing anything. Of course they are, it's just all internal. So this is why I've got to take a hard look at what the evidence is saying from the cognitive science and incorporating that where appropriate into our practice. Fewer things, greater depth. Quick summary of the faster reading research that came out of Sussex University last year. What they found was simply reading challenging novels aloud and at a fast pace in each lesson repositioned poorer readers as good readers, giving them a more engaged, uninterrupted reading experience over a sustained period. Just the headlines from that, the schools that took part, they selected 2 novels that were at least a year above what children would normally be studying. This was all they did for 12 weeks. They read the novels and they talked about them. There was no expectation for any written work. Not a huge study, 365 year 8s, but what they found after the 12 weeks, the mean progress for the whole cohort, they'd gone up by 8.5 months. What did they find for the children with a lower reading? Almost double, almost double. So colleagues, I just don't think we can afford to ignore this kind of evidence. So I've got sometimes people saying to me, well, I'm not in, I'm not an English teacher in secondary. Don't care. I won't use this exact timing. I do think I've got to take, I mean, my background's RE, I've got to take to account of the implications of this, of raising standards for my children. Sometimes primary colleagues are saying the same as well, but I was on a call yesterday with a primary head who is replicating this in her school with year 2 and year 4 after Christmas. Other schools working on it as well. It is also helpful that Ofsted are in the quality of education judgment in the implementation bit. It talks about the extent to which schools are developing reading across the curriculum beyond English in secondary and literacy in primary. So why they matter. Now, when we're talking about stories, you know, drawing on both Willingham's and Pinker's insights and others, obviously, Marianne Wolf's, etc. They're not just talking about novels or fairy stories, they're also talking about high quality texts or narratives. And so all really helpful for our practice. But what are they doing? They're providing the big picture. High quality text will provide the big picture. And we know from Christine Council's work how important the hinterland and background is. One of the most efficient ways to do it is through high quality text, conveys complex ideas, enriches children's vocabulary because you've got far more tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary within a text than you do in daily discourse, which is generally tier 1. So that's just how it is. Want to bump up children's vocab, read them a text. And as we've seen, it's inclusive for all children. We see it's inclusive for all children. So to turn now to what we're going to cut. Got to stop doing everything. You won't be surprised what I'm going to be saying. Recognize there's going to be priorities and trade-offs. We've got to follow the disciplined pursuit of less, fewer things in greater depth. And so thinking very carefully about how we use our meetings. Now, I'm not talking about the meetings currently. I'm talking when we're back to normal, but because most of the meetings I know will be currently involving arrangements for children and staff in and out of schools, absolute filling headspace. But when we're back to normal, we need to make sure that we're very intentional about how we're using meetings. One quick example, a head in a primary school was concerned that his staff didn't have an understanding of wider literature beyond a diet of dal. So had a staff meeting where colleagues came in, he had a pile of children's books on the desk, on the table, and everyone said to everyone, just take a book, pick up a book that takes your fancy, read it for the next 3/4 of an hour, and then we are going to have a chat for the last 15 minutes. What did he find? Most of them wanted to take the book home. That wasn't the intention, but it was obviously very good that they wanted to. It was just creating the space, having recognized that something needed to happen, instead of just expecting staff to do it, created the space. for that to happen. We've got lots of secondary schools. I'm thinking of the Durrington School, Sean Allison's work, where meetings in subject departments and in faculties are framed around this subject knowledge, extending subject knowledge. Marking, complete and utter waste of time, colleagues. Virtually all of it. You don't need me to tell you that. I'm not saying we never mark, but really, you know, most of it is not worth the paper it's written on. And here we've got Dylan William, St. Dylan. He reckons we spend about £2.5 billion a year on feedback that has almost no effect on student achievement. A classic example of what needs to go on the bonfire if we're being following the 80-20 rule or thereabouts. I'm not precious about it. Whole class feedback sheets, lots of people doing work on those, much, much better. We do this because it has greater impact for our children, not because we want to save time, but it does save time, okay? Data. It's not linear. Lots, you know, stop pretending that the systems, most systems in the sector, I'm not talking about your individual systems, but I tell you what, colleagues, most systems in the sector in primary and secondary assume progress is linear. It's not. It's not. Got to think of other ways of doing it. Got to rethink progress, which is now understood as being the curriculum itself, being the progression model. I have taught it. Have my children got it? How do I know? How am I going to have a very light touch way of gathering evidence for that? This is Michael Fordham's and Christine Council's a brilliant insight. You know, stop the nonsense of GCSE grades at Key Stage 3 and pseudo levels in primary. It's not universal, but it's pretty much. Anyway, so what adds the greatest value is what we need to be asking. I'm going to wrap up with this, colleagues, in the last 2 minutes. I'm drawing on Rosabeth Moss-Cantor's work. She is an American academic professor at Harvard University, and she spent her academic career identifying the attributes of people who work in successful organizations. So the metrics of success are companies and organizations that do good, right, on all sorts of measures, all right? That's not just the pursuit of the bottom line. She finds these, and I find them very helpful to show up, that colleagues in those settings show up. Okay, in our complete selves, or do we show up to meetings where we're half-hearted, but, you know, show up in our complete selves, speak up. So we all have the right to have our voices heard, but we do so in a way that is both robust and kind, and we encourage other people to speak up as well. Look up. Let's remind ourselves, particularly in these really demanding times, remind ourselves of why we're in this business. What is it we're trying to do? The difference that we're making. Team up. Great examples of this in the time that we've been through and currently going through, of colleagues working together, supporting one another. But the huge amount of evidence that on whatever we're doing, when we collaborate with others, outcomes tend to be stronger. It's not to say we don't do individual research and reading, but when we come together to work on plans, curriculum plans in particular, it's generally better when we're working with others. And then never give up. She says it never feels like success when you're in the middle of it. There will be times when we need to pause, give ourselves a breather, but actually then gather our strength and continue. And for me, this is the most important one, lift others up. So I think one of the most important things we can do is to encourage other people. So let's remember, colleagues, that we're human beings first, we're professionals second, that the young people we're working with are human beings first and they're learners second. And there we are, 10:05. I'm very happy to take questions now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary. It's brilliant. If you would just mind stopping sharing your screen, and then we will have a bit of a conversation, because there's lots of really interesting questions that have come out of what you've been discussing. So just to pick up on the first one, there's a lot of chat in the questions about the reading aloud study and how interesting was the idea of doing this. So there's a few sort of key questions that I think could be summarized here. One is about, first of all, from like a practical perspective, where can different subject leaders find good resources around this? Do you have any, like, one size fits all suggestion, or is it a case by case basis for different subjects? Is there a particular age group that we should be focusing on, or is it for all students? And again, it's like a practical thing is, again, looking at the research, is it important for students to also have a copy of the text? Because I can imagine that could be a potential blocker as well for teachers.
So lots in there. I'll address as economically as possible. So this was year 8. I know of schools who've done this already in primary and have seen similar results. And then a colleague I was talking to last night who's going to be starting it in January for year 2 and year 4. Very interesting question about whether they can all have the same text. And so I think there's a number of ways of looking at this. Those texts were already in school, but you know, in my own discipline, in religious education, I wouldn't have had a text for every child. I was lucky enough to have a copy of the Bible for every child, and we use them a lot. But I would be, so I think there's something to be said for children just listening to reading aloud. I've worked up some models where we share some of the text through an interactive whiteboard. I've just done some screenshots that I've taken down from Kindle, and I might print some of those off in the way that Richard Kennett did. So there's lots of ways of doing this. David Didow is very interesting, and I happen to agree with him that it's not always necessary for a child actually to follow along. In this, they did. What was surprising, though, was that the children who had been identified as low prior attaining, why they'd done so well, they said, we don't normally get the chance to do this interesting work. Right? What's their diet generally for the children who've been identified as weaker? They get a diet of phonics, decoding, SPAG, and leveled readers, all of which are important. But how are they ever going to catch up if they're not given this? And what they said was we got into the stories, which meant we wanted to carry on. Okay, intrinsic, internal motivation, just so powerful. So I did an interview with, and a film which I've recorded with Richard McDonald, who is head of English and leads English across a trust. And it's on my website, the film website, The Soak. And it's really interesting because he kind of stumbled across this with a GCSE group. He just found that they weren't remembering what because everything had been broken up. It was sort of gobbitized. We read a bit and then we analyze it, and we've got to prove some written work. Writing is important, but the children have got to be fed first. So yeah, Richard McDonald on The Soak. It's available for, free for 10 days if people want to look that up. I'll tweet about it as well later.
Fantastic, thanks, Mary. And so I think that's really useful for people to hear, because there's a lot of chat about what was the practical way to do this. And I guess the next question links in with it slightly. It's about thinking about how can you actually promote these ideas across a school. So when you're thinking about how to introduce this on a school-wide level across multiple subjects, how can you do that, and how can you influence, as a middle leader, how can you influence your senior leadership team to take this on board and to actually look at the research and see it as something that's valuable for students?
Okay, so two great examples, one from the Durrington Research School, Sean Allison's work, and his colleague, Fran Haynes, who has done amazing work across getting reading across the curriculum, but also in tutor time as well. And again, I've just done an interview and recording with Joanne Tiplady talking about her work getting this going in a school. She's moved schools now along with 2 colleagues. So they were middle leaders, they weren't senior leaders, and they just pulled together the evidence. It needs to be very intentionally thought through. I think it's really helpful. I mean, I hate to say this, but I think it's really helpful that there's an extra lens in the inspection framework. I mean, we're running our schools for our children, not for Ofsted, but it is quite helpful that this is there. So some senior leaders who might be reluctant, who think it is a luxury, might be more inclined to take it seriously if they know that there might be some conversations about this in, on an inspection team.
Fantastic. Okay, well, Brilliant. There's lots of interesting points, I think, that have been picked up by people, and I can see you won't have seen this, Mary, but there's lots of conversations going on Twitter and within the chat as well about how interesting all these points are. So thank you so much for taking the time today to pull this presentation together for us and share it with us. We're going to take a brief break here. So initially we said we're going to take a break until 10:30. So I think we'll stick to that. For those who are interested, the session has been live streamed on YouTube. So a couple of people said that they were having issues with their signal dropping out or whatever. So if you want to watch back, you missed a specific bit, you can just go onto the Seneca CPD YouTube channel and you'll be able to access the full session there. But for now, we'll take a break until 10:30, and then we'll hear from Sam and Kat after that. So thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you in about just under 20 minutes. And thank you, Mary. Okay, welcome back everyone, and I hope you had a time to grab some coffee or a tea or whatever it is you went to go and do in this last 15 minutes or so. I'm really excited to announce we've got Sam Strickland up next, and he's going to be talking to us about uncertainty, leading during uncertainty. So I'll hand over to Sam without any further ado. But if you do have any questions, just like you all did with Mary, please do keep those questions coming in the chat on Zoom. And also, please do keep using Seneca CPD hashtag to continue the conversation on Twitter. So over to you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And for those of you who might not know who I am, I'm Sam Strickland. I'm the principal of the Duston School in Northamptonshire, which is a large all-through school which starts from early years all the way through to post-16. So this talk is entitled Leading in a Time of Uncertainty, which is also the kind of subtitle of my first book, Education Exposed. And I kind of apologise really that this talk could potentially last 3 or 4 hours, and it's going to be a bit of a high-speed train. Going through the uncertainty that we face at the moment, which you probably don't need me to spell out to you, but then also what we can attempt to do about it and how we can try and bring some certainty to this kind of period of almost chaos in many regards in our schools and in our own world. So in terms of the uncertainty and what it kind of looks like, we've got, if you kind of cast back to when this crisis began, endless documents and documentation being fired out to schools, lastminute.com, whether it's on a Friday night at 10 p.m, or whether it's over the course of a bank holiday before schools are set to go back or may already have gone back, if you were, say, in Leicestershire as an example. We had the exam U-turn fiasco in the summer. And a big issue for schools, for all of us, doesn't matter what position you're in, because parents will naturally gravitate to all of us in schools, is to try and make a lot of this lastminute.com decision making palatable to parents. And what that's caused across the, certainly the last few months since September, is a tidal wave, I would argue, of parental concerns and parental complaints that personally for myself, in my own career, I've never seen before. I've never seen the volume of concerns, of worries and of complaints levelled at schools. And indeed the level of media attention at schools I've never seen before in my career. And that creates a huge problem for us all. Then we've got just the general day-to-day issue of trying to safeguard the school to mitigate against as many risks as posed by the virus, and of course our normal safeguarding procedures for all of the normal safeguarding matters that we deal with, which are compounded by COVID-19 and the impact that that's had on everybody. So there's been a real need for huge professional agility amongst all of us, whatever our position within a school is, and within that trying to manage kind of our own lives, our own welfare, our own well-being, hoping that our school, our employer will also take note of our well-being and our welfare. Something that we've done and instigated as a school, and it's something I do actually annually anyway, is to meet with every single member of staff as of the start of this half term to talk about them, their welfare, their well-being, but also importantly to talk about their professional development and where they want to go next with their career, because it's very easy, I would argue, within kind of this melee of madness to forget actually about how we continue to move forwards as well with our staff and with our institution, our schools. For some schools, I'm aware that it's been increased behavioural issues, and that's another issue for us all. Of course, we've got the knowledge gaps from lockdown 1, and indeed from pupils having to self-isolate or bubbles having to be sent out. We've then got this whole idea of the catch-up or recovery curriculum, and I'm not really sure what that term recovery curriculum means. I think it's a red herring, and I do worry from my own personal kind of angle that we're going to go back to a world of a circus of intervention within our schools if we're not careful. And then the minefield that is remote learning and all of the issues that brings up about connectivity, electronic devices, pupils actually engaging with the work, pupils at home actually having the conditions to learn and parental support to do so. And then we've got from day to day, minute by minute, second by second, you're 1 minute, 1 second away from disaster. One positive COVID case could absolutely derail your establishment, your institution, both in terms of year groups and in terms of staff and in terms of attendance. and that we still don't really know, despite the announcement earlier this year that exams are going to happen next year, whether they will, whether they won't, what they're going to look like. We've got the additional 3 weeks of time if they do go forward, and what does that actually really mean? And within all of this, there's a real need for strong governance and strong leadership from above, the dizzier heights of being, say, a head teacher, because equally heads need support as well, and executive heads would need support as well during this time period. And who is looking out and after for them? So the final bit within this, in terms of this uncertainty, is your own personal uncertainty and your ability to self-manage. And it's the swan effect that, again, irrespective of what position you hold within the school, whether you're in a classroom teaching, whether you're a head of department, a head of year, a senior leader, the head, you can't go around the school building demonstrating that you're outwardly in a world of chaos. You've got to keep that kind of veneer of professionalism and that smiley kind of face to try and calm the whole situation down and to reassure one another. And it's a huge team effort. But within this, though, it's thinking about what's really important within our schools. And I talk about in Education Exposed 2, which is all about the housing dream. What is the housing dream? It's our desire for our subjects. It's our desire to teach. It's our passion for learning and our passion to instill our passion for learning into our pupils. But there are still things that get in the way of that, and probably will continue to do so in many schools, workload being one. Endless priorities within our schools. I'm aware from things that people tell me that things like mock steads and quality assurance are still taking place. And really, I've got a question in this window, certainly, why are we doing that? Behaviour is a huge thing that gets in the way of the housing dream. If you can't command the respect of the classroom because the behaviour system in the school is not fit for purpose, then you can't teach. And we can argue till we're blue in the face that great planning leads to great teaching, which leads to great behaviour, but I think that's the wrong way round, really. And then we've got endless priorities, endless meetings, and leaving staff just kind of to it. And in many regards, is this a time where we can really reevaluate everything in our schools and strip it completely back? We've suspended institutionally all of our meetings, apart from a weekly departmental meeting, because I think that time is really important in terms of directed time to give it to departments. And the world continues to evolve, the school continues to function, and the pupils continue to learn. And it's certainly made me consider some of the other meetings that we have institutionally. Do we really need them? And are we actually better placed allowing staff to go home earlier than we might do ordinarily? And guess what? Have a life outside of school. And actually, does that lead to better functionality day to day within our schools? So what I really want to try and focus on within this talk, and kind of in a 22-ish now minute bomb blast, is how we add a layer of certainty into this kind of world of uncertainty. And I'm a firm believer in what I would describe as the mothership and the direction of the mothership being the school. And how does the mothership direct the satellites? That's all the different elements that make up the school. And if you look at the kind of most successful schools in the country, and certainly if you were to read, say, Tom Bennett's review on schools, which you can find on Google, it's about a 92-page document that talks about strong leadership and clear, strong direction. And within this world of uncertainty that we have at the moment, how strong is the direction and the leadership from the mothership permeating its way through the school, through all the satellites, so everything is joined up and everything is kind of in a rowing sense, rowing in the same direction. To what extent is this a team effort as well, but being driven from the top? So kind of the things I think that we should be thinking about, and things that are in our control at the moment. And I'm going to take you through a number of these. The first one is clearly defining the culture that you want. And that's a key feature of any really successful school. That comes from the top. And it's a huge team effort that then should permeate through the school. But it's being explicitly clear. What is it that you want? What is it that you believe in, you stand for? And in the world of MPQs, this would be linked back to your mission statement and your values as a school. But it is so important but it's more than just words. It's something that you feel when you go into an establishment, into a school, and it's something that's clearly lived and breathed by everybody, and it's part of the curriculum. But this is so important. Does everybody understand what the establishment is about? And that's something that's very much within our control. I then believe hugely in this, and I've spoken lots previously in previous talks about this, that the teacher is the expert. And we've got an opportunity here to really redefine this. I know there was a huge debate about furniture in rooms. Should we be sat in rows or should we not? And I appreciate that it's a directive to sit in rows at the moment from above. But this is just about the positioning of furniture in rooms at the end of the day. But there is a real opportunity here, if we're going to push forward the notion that the teacher is the expert with pupils sat in rows, the focus is on the teacher. And the way that I liken this is to when you get kind of, I suppose, criticisms about why would you have people sat in rows. If you go to the cinema, if you go to the theatre, if you go to a concert, your focus is on the screen or the stage as an audience member. It wouldn't be diverted to the left, to the right, or to behind. It's always forward. And in a classroom setting, with the absolute expert being the teacher in the room, why would your focus and your gaze not be on them? And this is a real opportunity, I would argue, to really champion this whole idea that the teacher is the expert, that we can change the narrative around things like guide from the side, or sage on the stage, or facilitative learner. I don't think those things really serve a purpose within our profession. I think that serves actually to undermine the positioning of our teachers. And actually, if we're saying that teachers should be relatively speaking quiet in lessons, what are we doing? If I look at a school's budget, 70 to 80% of any school's budget is on its staff, on its teachers, and we're asking those people to be quiet. And within that, why are we asking that high level subject knowledge expertise to be silenced? And this is, again, it's something in our control. It's something that we can redefine, and it will allow actually a content-led, knowledge-rich approach to thrive if we change the narrative. So again, to allow this to happen, though, leadership has to play its part. And leadership is about creating a culture where teachers can flourish. And there's a lot, I think, that we can still do around workload. And I don't pretend for a minute that in the current climate, workload has increased. Whatever school we're in this weird hybrid world of having to teach pupils that are in front of us, having to potentially cover colleagues who are absent, and of course the thorny issue of remote learning. So for any one given teacher, their universe has completely changed. But there are still things we can do around workload. I mean, I referenced at the start about meetings and reducing the number of meetings that we have. Thinking about data drops. How much data do we really need? How often do we need to reflect on that data? What does that data really mean? I've tweeted a lot and I've written about emails. I really do firmly believe in this, that emails serve no purpose at weekends or holidays unless they're major high-level safeguarding matters. I do think that we should leave one another alone at weekends and holidays. I think we all need downtime. Centralizing systems, centralizing behavior, and taking that issue away from staff. That's not to disempower staff. It actually empowers staff to do the things that are really important, to think about the curriculum, their subject knowledge, to work within their departmental teams, but also to go home at a decent time. And keeping our messaging really simple, really clear, and really consistent. We have as a school a giant workload charter, which is on our website, and I could do a whole talk around that. But I think that things like that are really important. That for us as a school is a giant commitment and a pledge to our staff about taking workload as seriously as we can. And I wouldn't profess to say I've got it 100% right, but I think it's a starting point. And again, it's something that senior leaders certainly could be thinking about for their staff. Also keeping in mind, though, that leadership isn't a race. We don't need to move at 100,000 miles an hour. And there was a model, I would say about 10-ish years ago, and I remember this very distinctly, that schools could be transformed in 18 months. Now, I'm not going to speak, you can transform a school culture relatively quickly, but to embed it takes a lot longer. And it's, for me here, it's about keeping priorities really simple. I would argue that for any one given academic year, there should be one core focus. We decided this year to kind of strip our school improvement plan right back. And to be fair, we don't have an unwieldy school improvement plan anyway, but we've entitled ours Doing the Same but Even Better, and it's just to slow everything down even further still, so all the systems that we have just continue to tick, because we've got these COVID systems, of course, wrapped around the school that we've never had before. But again, this is an opportunity for a reset, I would argue. What is it you're trying to achieve? I think you should only really have one major driver for any one year: culture, curriculum, subject expertise, whatever it might be. And then just a number of tiny foci, no more than 3, that underpin that. But it's understanding, though, that if you try and pour too much into the system, it kind of overflows. And I use a water bottle analogy here. When you buy a bottle of water brand new and you open it up, the bottle is pretty much brimming to the top. And if you start to pour too much in, it just overflows. And it's exactly the same for staff. Staff have got very little headroom to think about 1,000,001 different things. And within your messaging and any change you're trying to bring about, you've got to give people time. And I know that's a classic kind of argument against why things can happen in schools, but it's actually really, really true. And I think what's often forgotten when we launch something is that my idea, my initiative for the school, I would have spent 3 or 4 months thinking about it, mapping it out, planning it, discussing it with my senior team, discussing it with my governors. And then if I appear on Friday night and say this is going to come into effect on Monday morning, thinking I know what I'm doing, staff have had no time to think about that. So I think, again, this is an opportunity in a very weird way for us to consider that really seriously. Within that as well, there's this idea of you permit what you promote and you promote what you permit, which I've talked about previously in blogs and I've written about in my books. And this starts with the heads and it works its way down. But this is why behaviour is one of the head teacher standards. It's something that heads should be driving, and that's part of the school culture. But if, for the sake of argument, I've got a rule around shirts being tucked in, and I walk past pupils every single day, jolly smiling away down the corridors, and their shirts are untucked, and I say nothing about it, I'm actually saying that that's okay, and that I don't actually believe promote what I believe in, and I'm not really worth my salt in terms of the culture and the standards that I'm trying to drive. And I'm also saying to staff, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. And I'm saying to the pupils, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. So again, this is something, even in this current context, absolutely within our control. We take into that then that behaviour is a subject in its own right. It's something that should be taught. And a real danger in our schools is that we assume behaviour. When we say to pupils, when we kind of reprimand them, you need to behave. What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Does the pupil actually understand that? You might get a compliant pupil that nods and goes, yes, I need to behave. But do they really, really understand that? And again, a huge issue in our schools is that behaviour tends to be reactive. And I don't think we can ever get away from an element of behaviour management being reactive because we're responding to events, but how much proactive preempting can we do in our schools with the systems, with the processes, with the communication that's around it, and a really simple behaviour model that allows behaviour to be preemptively dealt with before it even begins. And again, that needs to be driven from the top. There needs to be training for our staff. For all of us, to be fair. I think back to my own, through my own career, the only time I actually received any real behaviour training, and when I say any real behaviour training, it was a 1-hour workshop, was on my PGCE. And it was literally, how do you use your eyebrows to look like Buzz Lightyear, where you raise an eyebrow up, this is before Buzz Lightyear, and palms down. And that was it. There was no real sense of anything else. And I think it's something that's been woefully lacking in our schools. And ultimately, poor behaviour is kryptonite to our schools. It's kryptonite to our culture, to our ethos, to our curriculum, to staffing, to staff well-being, to the morale of our staff, to learning, to pupil welfare and well-being, actually, and ultimately to academic outcomes. It's also reputationally damaging. If your behaviour is poor in your school, well, parents know about that, and parents talk. And the endless WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups that parents have, they'll very quickly throw a school under the bus on one of their groups if the school culture and behaviour is appalling. And then the danger, of course, then is that numbers on roll start to fall, funding will then be affected, and then your staffing levels are affected as a result. So to my mind, behaviour is the first thing that you have to secure within your school. From a teacher perspective, something I really do challenge here is this idea of giving 3 warnings before anything happens. If I'm a class teacher teaching 22 out of 25 periods in a week, I call it the daily 450 effect. I've got an average class of 30. I give every pupil 3 warnings every single lesson before a behaviour point, a reprimand, a detention, whatever comes into play. That is 90 warnings every lesson. From a teacher perspective, that is completely unsustainable. You are running around your classroom or your box behind your yellow line under the current climate, writing names on boards, putting ticks and crosses against them. It means nothing. And pupils will invariably push it to the 3rd warning, and then they'll calm down. But then they'll do exactly the same to the next colleague and the next colleague and the next colleague and the next colleague. And as a pupil, I could get away with 15 of these warnings in a day with nothing happening to me. And over the course of a week, 75 warnings, nothing happening to me. So I question the sustainability of an approach like this. I don't think it's effective, and I don't think actually ultimately it really works. I think it actually serves to undermine teachers. Also thinking about your routines for learning, and we've had to adapt ours, of course, because of COVID. We have a meet and greet at the classroom door within our school ordinarily, that because our teachers own their rooms. And at the moment, our teachers are having to move around the school while our pupils stay static, which I'm sure is commonplace in many schools. But what routines do you have in place that ultimately are consistent across the entire establishment? Whilst we've adapted ours, we still start our lessons with a retrieval practice starter for 5, which is self or peer marked. Teachers will still explain the context of the lesson, and our teachers will still use a big question that underpins the lesson, as opposed to learning objectives, which I think are white noise. But what are the routines that are in place? And even if the direction from the mothership here is weak, what could you personally do on your own micro level as an individual, or indeed as a department or as a satellite within the school? And an argument against routines is that they impinge on teacher creativity and freedom, and I would argue the reverse. If pupils know coming into your classroom, into your lessons, this is the expected norm, they settle quicker. You don't have 10 or 15 minutes of bustling around and time wasted. They're straight into it. That allows you to get on with the teaching far more quickly, and for you then to engage with your pupils in the creative way that you would want to engage with them. It's also important to consider the language that you use as well. And again, this is something that's in our control, but what is the intentional and the consistent language that we are using with our pupils, especially when we're addressing behaviour? How do we depersonalise things with our pupils? We really need to hone in on the behaviour rather than the individual. So to give you an example, if a pupil's misbehaving, you wouldn't say to a pupil, you're behaving like an idiot. You would say that your behaviour is not in line with our expectations. And that gives the pupil very little room to argue back in a defensive manner. They may well still argue back, but their ground is far less firm. Their kind of foundations are on sand really with you if you're professional in your approach here. And thinking about ambiguity in lessons as well. Either a classic is silence and asking a class to quieten down. Can I have a little bit of quiet now, please? Either we want silence or we want talking in our lessons. And that definition of quiet, I don't really know kind of what that actually means. Pushing on then in terms of how pupils respond to us in lessons, it's asking pupils to respond in fully articulated sentences. So when we, and this is where what we absolutely can control in our lessons at the moment, but trying to get pupils to, rather than say 2 + 2, what's 2 + 2 in a lesson, pupils respond with 4, they'll give a full answer. 2 + 2 is 4, sir or miss. This is the Douglam of shape and steps approach that you can read absolutely more about. Retrieval practice also is something else that we can really embed into our lessons, and probably even more so with us at the front of the lesson, but using knowledge recall starters, low stake quizzing. You can ask pupils to kind of soapbox style give a 30-second summary of everything they know about Mr. Burning from an Inspector Calls, or a 30-second rendition of why Hitler came to power. Another classic would be to say the water cycle in geography. It's got so many different labels on it, but actually pupils have to learn all those labels, and then you give them on a screen, on a visualizer, a half complete water cycle, and ask the pupils what's missing, and then ask pupils to explain kind of each stage of that water cycle. And that's another thing that we are in control of completely. I'd also urge as well within our lessons that setting easier work creates a false sense of engagement. And this is the differentiation aspect, the must, should, could, or the different coloured worksheets. And what are we actually trying to do here with our pupils? I think we're dampening expectations. I think we're creating self-fulfilling prophecies. I also think from our own perspective, we're creating an endless tirade of workload in terms of trying to produce endless resources, which actually give us very little bang for our buck. And then the other element is the thinking that goes behind our curriculum, which we could be doing outside of lessons during, again, if directed time is used effectively and efficiently during departmental meetings, but thinking about the curriculum as a progression model. How do we build from one lesson to the next, from 1 week to the next, from 1 month to the next? What is the foundational knowledge that we want that underpins our curriculum? How is our curriculum ultimately working from the bottom up if we're a progression model, as opposed to say using GCSE criteria, working it down? And I've spoken to various colleagues in other schools who are now thinking very seriously, and I'm glad they are, that GCSE grading criteria, grades 1 to 9, are defunct and irrelevant at Key Stage 3. They're meaningless. And again, this is an opportunity for us to rethink those kind of approaches, and also to rethink this whole idea that the curriculum should be pedagogically driven. Yes, there's a place for pedagogy. Yes, there's a place for activities. Of course there is. But the classic is the create a Viking boat. I want the class to draw, design, and cut out and build a Viking boat. Why? Well, it creates every false proxy under the sun, I would argue. What do they really know about the Vikings through doing an activity like that? And what are we doing when we're pedagogically driving our curriculum in terms of the cognitive overload for our pupils? We actually could be creating more harm than good. And it brings in this idea that pace, that activity leads to learning. And again, I would argue that is potentially a real false proxy for learning. Where we're building within our curriculum the importance of reading and academic literature that underpins our subject domains. And that goes in hand with this idea of if I'm at my academic best here, Hirsch, knowledge begets knowledge. When I'm at my academic worst, what I say to my staff is people simply need to know stuff. And that is so true. Without a bedrock of knowledge, pupils can't evaluate, synthesize, analyze anything, because they haven't got anything to do those things with. So what are we doing on that front to ensure that pupils not only are presented with the knowledge, but also have it built into their long-term schema? And this is where we need to think quite carefully within our own planning about what is it that we actually want our pupils to know. And I would argue that for any one given lesson, there should be 3 or 4 or potentially 5 at its most key pieces of knowledge that we want our pupils to learn and to have really learned from one lesson to the next, as you go from one lesson to the next. Kind of bringing this to a bit of a close, because I appreciate this, as I said at the start, and I apologise, it's like a bit of a high-speed chase, and I could talk about any one of these slides that I've presented in depth for about 20 or 30 minutes. But what are the features of the most successful schools in a national sense? You've got a real clear visibility of leaders. Leaders are on the ground, and even in this current climate, there's no reason why leaders can't be in corridors, popping their heads in and out of classrooms to check everything is okay, and that teachers are able to teach and to deliver the curriculum. There needs to be, and there should be, a real clarity of the culture of the school and over communication. Expectations, whatever your institutional expectations are, should be clearly understood by everybody, and they should be high, they should be sky high. There should be real levels of support across the school or establishment as well. And I'll go back to that point again of well communicated expectations. I've deliberately repeated that point because I think it is so important that what we want is kept really simple, but it is driven. And the classic mistake, which often happens, is head teacher in a staff briefing gives a message, walks out, thinks the message has been given, it's delivered and it's understood, done. And it's never repeated, it's never reinvestigated, it's never re-emphasized, it's never explored again. And we go on to the next thing. That first key message probably needs to be repeated about 100 times before it becomes ingrained as part of your school culture. So hopefully there's a bit of food for thought there. I appreciate I've kind of gone at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I'm going to kind of finish with this, which is a quote from Winston Churchill, and probably summarises where we're at the moment. But when going through hell, keep going. And thank you ever so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Sam. Brilliant talk. And just like with Mary's talk earlier, lots of interesting points that people picked up on in the chat through your session. If you just mind stopping sharing your screen so we can have more of a sort of conversation.
Yep, of course.
Great. So just a few points that I think are worth picking up on. One came in from, so Kate and Alex particularly picked up on this point around your idea around meetings and stripping back everything that was, not deemed as essential. So you mentioned departmental meetings, how important they are as a non-negotiable. The questions were around pastoral meetings, professional development, like how are you balancing all of that stuff? And like, is it just departmental meetings that are non-negotiables, or have you cut back on?
Yeah, so in terms of the meetings that we have in place at the moment, I meet with my senior leadership team 3 times a week now. We used to have your classic Monday after school meeting and a Wednesday morning before school meeting. But we've changed the format of the day, and we have lineups at the start of the day. So I want even more visibility at the start of the day than we had before. And we were really visible before, to be fair, under normal circumstances. So those senior leadership meetings have moved after school, and they're short and they're sharp. They're sort of 20 to 30 minutes long, and it's to chew over the fat of what we're seeing on the ground. I would argue that they're not particularly strategic at the moment in terms of the direction of the school, although we've already started to craft our school improvement plan for the next academic year. We've got the drivers of what we're going to have in place for September 2021 already drafted, because I want to share those with my staff on our January inset day. In terms then of the other directed time, the view that we've taken with COVID in place is that we want absolutely to protect our departmental time. We feel that is really important, that the 1 hour a week departmental meeting should be every single week and should be consistent. And we've asked middle leaders, who we've spent, to be fair, the previous sort of 2.5 years training in curriculum, to drive subject curriculum expertise within their teams. In terms of the inset days that you have in the year, because there's 5 of those that are allocated, we've got 2 normal inset days, and the rest we've divvied out as twilight training sessions. So in terms of CPD, because it's really hard to go out at the moment, what we've done for our staff is to put together two different things. On one front, we've asked middle leaders to identify subject specific training sessions online, because there's an absolute library's wealth worth out there now, and to share that with their teams, and to really map out a real high quality 2-hour twilight training session around that within one of the 9 that we have within the year. And then in the other side is institutional CPD, using again the library drive of things that are out there. So to give you an example, we're going to wear on our January inset day Tom Sherrington's talk around he's done a talk around curriculum. We want to share that with our staff. These are free. What a great opportunity, and it would cost thousands of pounds to send people out to have that level of training. But also there's a consistency, because everybody's seeing the same thing. What we've done with staff briefing is to record it and to send it out on Microsoft Teams, and to allow staff to watch it when they want. We've opted this year for a more fluid model in terms of meetings, whereby do it in your own time if you want. You could do it during your PPA, but actually we'd rather you left the school by sort of 3:30, 4 o'clock. We don't really want you in the building, in the nicest of senses. So we're still doing CPD, but in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess just a follow-up question on that then, are you finding any challenges with compliance around this, or people not necessarily accessing the meetings when they should have done it and therefore missing stuff, and making that's obviously potential for making the communication much harder?
Yeah. To be fair, so far, I don't want to rest on my laurels. No, we haven't actually. But then I think the culture of the school and the professionalism of the staff is such that they know what's expected, and we've been really, really clear from the word go how this year was going to work. We did lots during lockdown with our staff about what September was going to look like. So far we haven't, and I think what's also helped is the one-to-ones with all of the staff as well. I've deliberately asked them during my one-to-one meetings at the start of this half term, where have we dropped the ball? is there anything that we've dropped the ball on? And I don't mean that to be defensive about it in terms of my sense. I actually want to know, because to my mind, I don't think this situation is going away anytime soon. I think we're going to have the rest of this academic year running in the way that we are now, being really realistic. So if there is something we've dropped the ball on, well, we can't change it from in the past, but how do we rectify it moving forwards? Because I don't want to continue to make the same mistakes. And that dialogue with staff has been hugely valuable.
Great, thank you for outlining that. So on to another question now. For like Jacob, Andrew and Kerry were all asking about this, was around just basically wanted to go into a bit more detail about what your behaviour policy looks like. You've given like a bits and bobs here and there of what it looks like in particular scenarios. They were just wanting to understand it in a bit more detail, basically. Okay, so we have 5 clear discernible rules across the school. So the first one is not to be late to school, and we have institutional lineups every single day, and pupils are meant to come before the start of the school day in waves, so 1 year group at a time, to be lined up, to be addressed by me. But if you're late, you're in a same day centralised detention after school. That's a clear end of. If you're late, that's what happens. The second rule is around mobile phones, that we don't expect them to be seen or used during the school day. You can bring one to school if you want, but we will confiscate it for a week, including the weekends, and that's always been in place. And then we have a classroom code of conduct based around 3 clear expectations. First one is that you respect the teacher or the member of staff within the room, and you follow instructions without question. And of course, there's a caveat to that. We're not asking instructions like jump out the window. It's basic, clear things like turn to page 5. If you need to work with your partner, you don't argue about basic things teachers should expect of their pupils. The second is that you engage with the work fully, to the best of your abilities, but without distracting others. And we have what we call the natural state in our lessons, where pupils work in silence, and we mean silence. So if you start talking in that time, you will be issued with a behaviour point. And then the third expectation is around being fully equipped and undertaking all of the homework that's expected of you, or the remote learning expected of you. Now, if I fall foul of those rules, those expectations, and I get a behaviour point, then your tutor would speak to you at the end of the day in a correctional conversation. If, however, I get 2 or more, then I would end up in a centralised detention, which is taken either by pastoral staff or senior staff, and it's all tiered. So the more behaviour points that we get, the longer those detentions are. If I get 2 after schools in a week, I'm in a senior leadership detention that same week as well. So pupils understand all of this, and underpinning this, we've got a series of non-negotiables for which pupils would simply be excluded, for things that are what I would describe as antisocial behaviours that serve no purpose in a school or in society, such as swearing at staff would be an example. We would exclude for that because I just don't think it's appropriate. And we also have an alert button on SIMS for pupils that potentially might want to destroy a lesson, and there are duty staff within the school who will go and swoop up pupil X. What we've also done is we've put different year groups in different faculty wings within the school so they don't move. And within every faculty wing, there are always 2 to 4 members of staff on duty patrolling the corridor. And it's literally a case of just going in and out of rooms and checking everything is okay. And I'll do the same. I will go in and out of classrooms daily just to see what the culture and the climate is like, and to ask members of staff if everything's okay as well. Fantastic. That's really comprehensive. Sorry. So thank you. Yeah, that's really, I think people find that really useful because there's lots of questions around that. And then a final question, I think from Ginny, was asked. Ginny was asking about retrieval tasks and how you can use retrieval tasks to close COVID learning gaps, and how you saw that working. Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about that? That'd be really. Yeah,
if I kind of go back to when we started to reopen the school and kind of go from what we did there. When we reopened in June and we brought our examination year groups back, our year 10s and our year 12s, we deliberately undertook a series of big lectures with the pupils to cover the ground of what they should have covered during lockdown 1. And we deliberately devoted the first 2 weeks of the academic year for our year 11s and our now year 13s to engaging them in a series of big lectures within our subject domains to effectively give the kids kind of like a massive knowledge download. Then in normal lessons, We're engaging our pupils in retrieval practice starters for 5s. That's something that every single teacher in every lesson does from one lesson to the next. So it's constantly retrieving previous learning, prior learning. Every fortnight, there's a 20-question retrieval practice quiz, and every 6 weeks we have a 50-question retrieval quiz. So we're trying to go back over prior learning all the time, and we deliberately avoided testing all the pupils when they first came back in September, which I'm aware some institutions have done. I think that potentially misses the point, really. I think we were very clear in our own minds the pupils were going to come back with big gaps in knowledge, but we took the view we'd far rather, through our teachers, work out in real time through teaching what those gaps are, and then allow teachers to plug those gaps, rather than potentially losing 2 or 3 weeks of learning time with tests.
Great, thank you. There's certainly, I don't know if you have seen the chat popping up, Sam, but there's a lot of interest around your behaviour policy. So, okay. I mean, if you're happy to, and obviously, you know, you might have a reason you can't share this, but people, maybe you can share on your Twitter, like a one page or something. People, I'm sure, would love to see that. So yeah, keep an eye out for that on Twitter if you'd like to see it, everyone. But Sam, thank you so much. It's been really
pleasure. Thank you.
From you, and thanks for joining.
Take care. Thank you.
So next we're over to Kat Howard. So Kat is with us. She's had a very busy morning, so she's back on the call, which is great. Hopefully she will be able to share her screen with us. And Kat, just give a bit of background on Kat. Kat is the founder of LitDrive, if any English teachers around there out there are familiar with that. But she's also author of various books and an assistant principal as well. So she's got some great stuff to talk about workload reduction. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kat now.
Thanks so much, Richard. I've just popped our key documents for Dustin School, because if anybody doesn't know, I'm actually at the same school as Sam. So for those people that were asking for the behaviour policy, I've just popped a link on there, and that will take you through to all of our key documents. So yeah, as Richard said, I've kind of been jumping about a little bit because we've had our first annual general meeting for LitDrive. So I've kind of kept an ear in of the other talks and kind of key messages that I've taken. So managed to get a great deal from both Sam and Mary this morning as well. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Kat Howard. I'm assistant principal at the Dustin School, along with Sam there. I'm also founder of LitDrive, which is a charitable organisation that supports English teachers and tutors internationally with professional development. So we're a subject association, essentially, or a subject community for English teachers. I'm also author of the book Stop Talking About Wellbeing, a pragmatic approach to teacher workload, that came out earlier this year, and co-author of the book Symbiosis, the curriculum and the classroom, which was released last month. And Symbiosis was very much a progression almost of my thinking from Stop Talking About Wellbeing, and I'll touch upon kind of the what I mean by that in just a little bit. I think that at the moment, if we're thinking about leadership, and this might sound a little bit flippant, but I'll contextualize it. Leadership at the moment is no different to leadership as it's come before. I think what's happened is that the existing tensions that we find within schools are magnified. And so it's really about keeping the main thing. And I'll talk about what the main thing is and what how sometimes maybe we suffer from distractions. I think that there are several kind of frustrations. Every single teacher within our school at the moment wants to do a good job, and the frustration comes from not being able to do that job to its fullest capacity, whether that means frustrations or of the catch-up narrative, and how perhaps that can sometimes be a little bit detrimental because we cannot create time or recreate time and take time from nowhere, but also frustrations around being able to provide a really high quality of teaching to our students, which takes us back to our core purpose in school as a teacher, and to what extent we can be able to do that. So this is actually taken from the Wellbeing Work at Schools publication that came out. It was a wellbeing research report that came out, it's a couple of years ago now. It's worth checking out alongside the NFER teacher autonomy research was really, really interesting here, because when we talk about how to look after staff and how to lead effectively in school in order to support staff, we often come back to talking about well-being and workload as one and the same, when actually well-being is the outcome of all of the systems and the conditions that we create for our staff, which is why you have a nice hefty line through that health. We have no dictation, and we cannot outline or instruct to anybody about what's going to make them feel a sense of contentment, and we probably feel that more so than ever at the moment. We're not here to fix things for people, and a great deal of our role at the moment is confined by external regulation and to what extent we can or can't do things. So instead of perhaps focusing on what we can and can't fix, it's about working within that remit of what's within our control. And what is within our control is building our relationships within schools, of ensuring that we continue that sense of community that we all know drives the school, of making sure that we consider the how of what we're doing and not just the what. So how are we walking in the shoes of our NQTs when we're looking at strategy and we're looking at whole school change? How are we ensuring that we don't underestimate the quality of a decent curriculum and what that means to a teacher when it comes to the clarity of their goals and their sense of purpose? How are we providing autonomy to the teacher to as much degree as we possibly can in this current climate? And also, how are we providing a sense of security and safety? And I should think that that's probably our sticking point at the moment on a grander scale, because when it comes to change at the moment, we all know what change fatigue within a normal school setting looks like, and that distraction sometimes that we suffer as a profession of trying to change too much too soon and not necessarily evaluating the process as we go, and being receptive to the fact that any change that's carried out too quickly will fail, even the best initiatives in the world, and any change that's not carried out alongside other people that it has an impact on, which is why I say walk in the shoes of your NQT, will also fail, because we need to be receptive to anything that we do, that there's a possibility that it's going to impact different people in different ways. And so I think I always try to come back to these four overarching points when I'm trying to look after staff through strategic change, because ultimately I can't have an impact on physical or mental health. The conditions that we create will mean that that person can then have an impact on their own physical and mental health. That's not my role. My role is to make sure that the conditions that they're coming into work and are encountering improve the quality of their professional life, their professional work as a whole. That's my role as a leader. And so if we're thinking about the tensions that we're currently encountering, they're no different. They're just magnified from, I think, where we were before, and I'll come on to what I mean by that. So I think we've always had this tension between accountability and data reporting, and how we report data, and how actually perhaps what we report doesn't necessarily match up with what we know to be great teaching over time. If we think about school improvement plans, we often talk about 6 or 12 months in advance. We don't necessarily look to what that looks like in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And actually, if we come back to this idea of the curriculum as a progression model, our success, our indicator of how that's going to be effective, won't necessarily always present itself to us in the first 6, 9, 12 months. And so actually within the school improvement plan, and this is, as Sam was saying, about kind of looking ahead, and we've already got our eye on our school improvement plan for next year, which makes people sound either crazy or incredibly organized. Actually, it's a really effective way of thinking about, well, what the changes that we've put into place this year or last year and what we've learned from them, how are we still keeping our eye on those in 18 months or 2 years or 3 years time? How have we maybe considered and evaluated the journey that our year 7s have been on, who are now in year 9 and year 10, and what have we learned from that process? That trajectory is so important, and we constantly manage this tension in a normal school setting. If we think about the tension between kind of now and the norm, I imagine it as though we are, as school leaders, kind of treading across two parallels and straddling those two parallels. The first being the everyday and the long-term plan and the strategic decisions that we need to make in order to ensure the best quality for our students, best quality of education. And at the same time, we have this niggle COVID line that we're having to combat the everyday. And it becomes almost a sense of, to draw a metaphor as an English teacher, this series of tectonic plates that we are asking staff to kind of marry up, that we have these, you know, the trajectory, the plan that we have for our curriculum, for effective teaching. And then along the way, we have to also consider the everyday responsive, quite reactive situation that COVID has created on our schools, and how to ensure that as much as we possibly can for our staff, at least our senior leadership team, is to almost act as the buffer of that second line, and that for our teachers, actually, that journey, that everyday experience of being in the school feels very much as far as we can get it to the norm as possible, and managing that tension on their behalf. It's, as I said before, I think we all know the feeling of change fatigue and the impact that can have. And it's almost as though when we're looking at implementing any initiatives at the moment or any change, that it has to provide stability, because the fatigue that we're feeling, and I think all teachers are feeling at the moment, is really just as a result of either that change or expectation of change. I speak to a great deal of teachers who are talking about how tired they feel at the moment, and a real kind of confusion as to why that might be. And it really is as a result of just this anticipation of change, or anticipation of not necessarily knowing what's going to come next. And our role is to temper that. And also this tension between, when we're thinking about how to implement or look after our staff, where do we need to be quite rigid in our framework or in our approach? So things like behaviour systems need to be rigid for teachers in order to enable them to do their job. But where have we got flexibility, where actually we're listening to people when we're leading? And we can't lead without effectively listening to people when we implement new initiatives, because where are we having the flexibility to be receptive and make amendments and work out and be quite honest and humble when processes aren't working? And sometimes a great deal of whole school processes, particularly, you won't be able to see the gaps, even with the best of our ability of walking in the shoes of our NQT, and almost this mental rehearsal of taking yourself through what that process will look like in action. Often a great deal of the stumbling blocks won't come up until we see that further down the line. So it is the fact that you have to be open and receptive to those that feedback, and thinking about what you might do with that. Now, this comes through to magnification. I think there's two things to kind of consider when you think about our current situation in schools. We have a misplaced manifestation of from staff. I think that if we are, and this is what I mean about really listening quite carefully, because a great deal of the time when I'm speaking to staff, and staff are providing feedback for various different aspects of school life, it's not necessarily sometimes the thing that we're talking about. So say, for example, if I come home and, you know, and there's no bread for tomorrow morning for my toast, and I go absolutely off the wall, it's probably not about the loaf of bread. It's probably about the 15 other things that have happened over the course of the day to get to the fact that I've got home and there's no bread. And this is what I mean about kind of misplaced manifestation of anxiety and stress, that we have to be really, really effective at listening at the moment, because often the thing that's being complained about, or the niggle that you're receiving feedback from, might not always necessarily be where that anxiety or that stress or that discontentment is coming from. And it's really about working incredibly hard to identify what the honest situation is. I think the other thing you have to be careful with there as a leader is that everyone wants to do a good job, as I said at the beginning, and so often you won't hear the truth, you won't hear the honest account. And it's actually about working really, really closely with all members, all layers of the staff body, in order to make sure that you are getting that narrative in as honest representatively honest as you possibly can, because everyone will want to tell you that everything is fine. And I think that one thing that we do through Sam's one-to-ones and through the kind of the really open lines of communication, through creating regular faculty time, it's something that I think we do incredibly well at Dustin, but there's always capacity to make sure that you're hearing the truth. I think there's always work to be done there, definitely. So if we think about the magnification as well, the other thing to consider, I think, at the moment is the spectrum of a response to COVID and us understanding where staff are at. And so you have a great deal of, I mean, this is a microcosm of society, is it not? That you have a great deal of people at the moment that are getting on and are feeling the impact of that stress and seem to be pretty resilient to that. And then you have some people that are hugely impacted, and that's having a massive impact on their day-to-day quality of life. And it's about tempering that and making sure that we're not making assumptions that everybody is in the same place at the same time, that everyone is going to have the same reaction to the same initiatives or same processes that we put into place to combat that reactive nature of COVID. And I think it's being very aware of that at that point, that not everybody is in the same place at the same point. So perhaps if we think about how we're going to enable ourselves to stay at this stability or provide that stability for staff within schools, it's thinking about refocusing staff. And this is coming back to our key messages. What makes us feel really, really empowered and really invigorated about coming into school? What is our biggest distraction at the moment? And I would very much argue that that is our curriculum. Never underestimate the power as a teacher that delivering a decent, high quality curriculum can have for staff. That is such a welcome distraction when it doesn't feel burdensome, because it's our core purpose, it's the sole reason that we're in the building, and it's not, there's no other kind of sense of distraction from anything else. Then actually that does really, really powerful things. It ignites us as teachers. And so the school system, my role as a school leader is to make sure that the school systems support teachers to teach, that the school systems protect that teaching time and enable teachers to be able to think about teaching, talk about teaching with other subject experts in their field as much as possible, which is why our weekly faculty time is so welcomed alongside our use of twilight time that we've used to create these almost miniature subject communities within the school. But where are we protecting that time as much as possible to ensure that the curriculum perhaps moves beyond being a distraction, but it actually refocuses and recenters our teachers to concentrate on what actually matters? And by handing that time over, that we are focusing our attention, we're communicating the priority to what we give time to. So when we're looking at the school calendar at the moment, and there's a great deal to be taken from what we'll learn when we come through the other side of this and what that will look like, is, where are we actually going to keep the time in to enable teachers to have those conversations with other teachers? So as I say, they are talking about teaching, thinking about teaching, or teaching itself. That's actually, where all of us get the highest value when we are in work every day. So where am I enabling my staff to be able to do that? There's a great deal, I think, around workload itself, that when we're looking at any sort of implementation within the school system, that we carry out a litmus test. And I usually ask a series of questions of, will it improve student outcomes? And I'm not just talking about data there, I'm talking about the student experience. So where will it also improve the student experience of our curriculum as a whole? But how will it impact staff workload? And that might be that whatever it is that we are introducing negatively impacts staff workload to begin with. So it takes away from our resource. We have a finite amount of time in schools. Everybody, in an ideal world, and I know I'm talking about an ideal world when I say this here, so please don't think I say this flippantly, but in an ideal world, we'd all be working a 40-hour week. Okay, so we've got 40 hours for our teachers to work in schools. How are we actually explicitly spending that time? when it comes to this new initiative. So say, for example, when we looked at introducing workbooks, for example, across a subject, we know that that's going to be labour intensive to begin with. Where are we enabling our teachers the time to invest in the subject knowledge that they will require to put together effective workbooks? Where have we provided them with the opportunity to see what that might look like and what success looks like in order to be able to put together a workbook that is mindful of cognitive load, that makes really decisive subject-specific decisions around assessment or retrieval? Where are we enabling the time to do that before we then, sell it as an investment long-term on workload reduction? If we're not providing the time at the beginning and front-loading that in order to make way for this improvement in the student experience, this improvement in student outcomes, then we may as well write it off. And it comes back to what I was saying before about initiative, that the very best initiatives will fall apart if we don't just consider that idea of front-loading the thinking or front-loading the labour that will be required from us all in order to put something effective into action. So I think, and that applies to not just curriculum decisions, but whole school strategic decisions of, if we're not going to improve the student experience, if we're not going to reduce workload long term, then why on earth are we doing it in the first place? So when we're thinking about how we refocus our energy and our attention in schools back to this sense of purpose, back to the curriculum that we can invest in, because we know that that's where ultimately, in a dream world, in my idyllic dream, that's what I want all of my teachers to be focused on, because I know that that's where all the really interesting, juicy conversations of their subject are going to take place. How do I communicate that priority? And I think, as I said before, what we give time to is what we say is important. We can provide key messages, we can re-communicate those key messages, we can put it as part of our school improvement plan, but actually, if we're not talking the talk as such, then it will all fall by the wayside. We can't say that something is important without acting as though it's important. It has to breathe from the top, and it also has to breathe in our everyday operations. And so where are we giving time over on the calendar to say that that's important? As a working example of that, I know Sam talked about our weekly faculty meetings. We've given twilight time over to subject-specific CPD. So our subject leaders have all curated programmes that they will meet, and they really utilise the different subject experts within the team to say that that's important. We've given over protected time for coaching that's integral to part of our performance management. And so when we're communicating the priority, you either communicate it as an integral part of your school processes. So for example, coaching as part of our performance management, where we're providing a really clear message about its value there, and also the time as well to do so. The other thing to consider when we are communicating the priority is where we're providing opportunities to endorse working as a collegiate within those key messages, because we don't want any of our staff to be working in isolation on any of this. I don't want a member of staff to be squirreling away on a workbook in isolation without anybody else seeing it, or any sort of peer review, or any sort of conversations around the other experts in their team in order to bring that to life. So where are we providing regular opportunities for our subject experts to come together, spending most of their time either thinking or talking about teaching, so that our system breeds that? Where are we communicating in a way that's perhaps simple enough that it's really, really clear that that's our key purpose? Our key purpose is to improve the student experience, to present our teachers as experts within the classroom and outside within their faculties with other professionals of their field. In a simple enough term that it kind of breathes those key messages, but also in such a way, a repeated way, that it becomes, there's a sense of automaticity about what we're saying, that eventually it becomes, as Sam and I are sharing today, well, this is what we do here. This is how we approach developing our teams as experts. This is how we approach really focusing on and giving value and status to the individual and their professional development, and the fact that they are entitled to that, as we are a graduate profession, that they're entitled, we have a moral duty to provide that time to them. How are we communicating that in such a way that it becomes the norm, that it isn't isn't just you know, something that we say that's stuck on a piece of paper or put on an improvement document, that actually it's you see it as evidenced in every single aspect of our school life. I think that when we focus on working as a collegiate, it does incredible things, not just when we're encouraging collaboration within department level, but it also enables us to be able to listen to lead a lot more, as I was saying earlier, because it shifts our attention as leaders, not about fixing, but as moving forward as part of a collegiate, as part of a collective decision-making process, that we're making decisions with people, and we're not just making decisions that will affect people so that it's done to them, I think is incredibly important. Now, the way that this will look is coming back to this implementation and front loading the thinking and front loading how you implement initiative within schools. So where are we whenever we're thinking about what something might look like? Where are we making sure that the conversations go with it? Where are we gaining feedback from staff on quite an informal level, so that there isn't this sense of accountability or pressure about what they do or don't say when they're providing feedback? So it's not on a written down survey that we've said it's okay, it's anonymous, you don't have to worry that we'll know that it's you. That doesn't provide honest feedback, and it removes the context of a conversation. Surveys serve their part, don't get me wrong, but it's part of a wider web and network of that feedback communication that you have within school. So actually, as part of, you know, our when we're walking around the school as senior leadership, but also middle leadership as well, it's those informal exchanges that are so much more valuable than anything I could ever see on a feedback form, because it helps not only build those lines of communication, really secure relationships, professional relationships within school, like every single layer, but it also makes for quite timely responses. It means that if something has been communicated out to staff, it provides that kind of there's no safer space than the 2-minute exchange in the corridor, where, you know, it doesn't create that sense of formality, but actually I'm able to respond quite quickly to what I think about a particular idea, or how it might work differently, or how it might impact this particular corner or this particular department of the school. And those are so valuable in driving ideas forward, particularly at the moment, but also driving professional relationships forward as well. I think the other aspect is to make sure that we are taking a really flexible approach to looking after staff, particularly at the moment. But again, it's like I say at the moment, but I do genuinely mean that a great deal of what I say is all the time, because COVID doesn't change anything. It's just made everything feel slightly more urgent, and obviously it's had a massive impact on the stress, but it just enables us to, I think, understand our processes and how we look after people far better. But I think we have to be flexible in our approach and lead on coming back to, I know I've said it 3 times now, everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone is coming into school really, really frustrated, and their frustrations lie at not being able to do that job to the best of their ability, and really worrying. Some teachers that I speak to, various networks, genuinely concerned that that's going to be recognised as a fault on their part, and not just the limitations that a pandemic offers to them. And that's really quite disheartening. And so actually, when we are having conversations with staff around self-isolating, around childcare, around being able to accommodate for the stress and anxiety that people are clearly feeling, it's really leading with that emotional intelligence of everyone wants to do a good job. How can I help you? How can I make that as easy as possible for you? And it's coming back to, as I say, these 4 key overarching areas of how can I provide teachers with a sense of purpose? How can I provide teachers with as many opportunities to have professional, really meaningful professional relationships with others, and feel that they are working as part of a collegiate? How am I providing teachers with a sense of autonomy, and autonomy over the curriculum, autonomy over their subject knowledge, autonomy over their professional development as well, and the opportunity to discuss that? And where am I providing that sense of stability and safety as much as physically possible, so that irrespective as to the wider world, that school community is actually a really safe haven for teachers teachers at the moment, because I think we can all agree that that's not quite possibly how some particular areas of outside of the educational industry are painting the teaching profession at the moment, and we all know how incredible it is. So what's next? What can we learn from perhaps 2020? And what can we maybe take from this? And I think these are the silver linings, definitely, that that I will take from this year, and the experience and the kind of the learning curves that it's taught me, that I think would be really useful, hopefully, to share with you. I think I knew this already. Curriculum ignites us. When we start taking teachers back to curriculum, it's that Malcolm Arnold Academy was actually talking about this last night, that she always asks people at interview about their subject, because she likes to see the light go on. And actually that's fantastic when you bring people together to talk about their subject. That's what keeps teachers in teaching, and the opportunity, if we can provide teachers with as many opportunities to do that as possible, that's going to keep our profession with really high quality teachers in it, which I think is really exciting. I think there's a great deal to be learned around the types of meetings and types of conversations that we had, not necessarily about the amount. I know there's several different debates that go on around kind of meetings or conversations, but as long as it's not all via email so that I can't talk to another human being, I'm not really bothered. But actually, how can we ensure that those conversations are full of respectful honesty? And what I call objective rebellion, making sure that we are questioning things, because everyone's not just telling everybody else they're fine, because actually I need people to question things in order to get better in my role. I need people to question things in order to improve our system. So we need to constantly, I think Mary wrote a really lovely blog on this called Quietly Curious. We need to be curious. We need to be ongoingly inquisitive about how we can change our systems. I want people to be honest with me. And so where we create opportunities for those conversations to take place. But ultimately, where can we ensure that we are empowering staff to keeping the main thing? Where can we make sure that the curriculum isn't a distraction? It's not something else that has to be done, but actually it's the only thing that should be being done by our teachers, and all of the systems surrounding the curriculum enable that work to take place. So hopefully that leaves you on a little bit of a positive for leadership in COVID-19 at least. But thank you ever so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Kat. Really, really brilliant talk again. You've got 3 unbelievably high quality talks, so thank you for finishing the last talk off. There's been quite a few questions come in, but first of all, just want to say apologies for the interruption.
No worries.
Somebody managed to unmute themselves. I'm not really sure how, because you're not meant to be able to do it on Zoom, but anyway, it happened. So
no worries.
Apologies for that. So first question, someone called Jog Archer and Alex asked this quite at the beginning when you're talking about whole school development plans, and they were just interested in how you, as a school, having heard what Sam has talked about before, how you guys communicate this whole school development plan while still focusing on this one thing that Sam was talking. You weren't hearing Sam's talk, but Sam was talking about how you
I was talking about
one focus in your school development plan for each year.
Yeah, so
marry those two sort of potentially.
Yeah, so we kind of so Sam puts a school development plan, a school improvement plan together quite early with the senior leadership team that is also communicated quite early to staff. But to be quite honest, our mantra is probably there's nothing new here, because we're doing the same but even better. We're doing the same but even better still, and it's keeping to those 3 key messages. So we follow curriculum, culture, and outcomes. So our culture is obviously the systems that are that make Dustin, that support our students to be able to learn, that remove any of the barriers there around kind of, the behaviour policy and all of the operational aspects of our culture to make sure that we are creating that environment for learning. Our focus on curriculum is developing our teachers as experts, of making sure that we're providing those opportunities for professional development and what that needs to look like in order to make sure that our teachers are the expert in the room and that they feel that they've been given time to do so. And then the outcomes are natural consequences of that. So where we would like to be as a result of really effective consistent implementation of the other two aspects of our school improvement plan. And so everything kind of, all of our actions as such and our intents over the course of the year really root back to curriculum and culture, and the outcomes are, you know, how we keep our eye on that, how we know that they're kind of indicative of our success, I think, of our ongoing trajectory as such.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very interesting place to work. It sounds like you've really been doing a lot of work around, you know, the stuff you and Sam talked about. I think people have really appreciated being able to hear from both of you about two slightly different, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Really in-depth insight into what you guys are up to. So really interesting. Another question. Gemma and Lucy mentioned this point about managing your own emotional exhaustion, and how, when you are trying to, you know, how to make sure you don't take on other people's burden for your own negative expense, basically.
Yeah, I think that comes down, as a school leader, I think that comes down to a few things. I think you have to be quite strategic with your emotional burden, and by that I mean, you know, if you know that you are going to have the difficult conversations first, because actually you're probably expending as much energy prepping or worrying about the conversation and how it's going to go, that when you have it, it's almost that you're exhausted from thinking about how the conversation is going to go at the moment. Susan Scott's Fierce Conversations is really good for that, because it is about the fact the relationship is the conversation. So ultimately, being quite strategic and making sure that you have those conversations that you are almost not dreading, but you know it's going to be difficult. 9 times out of 10, it's never going to be as difficult as you think it will be. I think it's also about being really honest and transparent. Sam does this incredibly well. I've learned a great deal this year about providing a rationale to, you know, providing the how and the why behind your decisions is so important for making people work more effectively together as people. And so I would definitely say that probably are the main 2 ways that I reduce any kind of emotional burden as a result of others. It's, you know, my role is how can I help? What can I support with? And that doesn't necessarily make it a personal conversation where I'm trying to support personally, but what can I do professionally that means that you are able to look after yourself personally? I think just reframes that conversation and also looks after yourself at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a follow-up that's sort of linked to this, I guess, like, let's talk about your perspective and sort of your outcome on it, but so other people, I imagine, do, you know, obviously do coaching within the school as well. What support do you give those members of staff
for coaching? So all of our we had like a pilot, because I'm a very big believer of kind of trialing something and scaling up and getting feedback along the way. So we had a coaching party of 40 members of staff last year who were all formally trained. We then, before we scaled up the coaching approach across the school, we trained all of our staff again in September. That will then be revisited with all staff in January. So we're constantly returning to those key messages and providing high quality professional development to go alongside, rather than saying, okay, we're going to do coaching now, we're all doing coaching. Actually, you have to support that with a mechanism to make sure that people feel supported to have those conversations. And a great deal of the training, Chris Moyes came in to work with us, a great deal of the training does come back to how do you slide from that scale of coaching, of, you know, providing people with the self-regulation to be able to ask their own questions and reflect upon their own processes and you know, their day-to-day professional life, but then moving to the other end of the scale of mentor. Where are you signposting that person to, you know, areas that will support them or help them to improve, or help them with whatever sticking point they've come up against? And it's a great deal about, you know, moving on. And I think that's probably quite a nice model for leadership. Where are you moving across this kind of mentor to coach spectrum, so that you're not just trying to fix things for people, because actually that's quite disempowering, that you're bringing people along the journey so that they are the leadership of the you know, of the future as such.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I think, you know, the disempowering of it is yeah, it's got a huge potential.
Yeah, nobody wants their problems fixing, so
exactly. Want to be able to train
yeah.
problems, right? So yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on to a separate point that kind of linked in a way, but Salma picked up on it, and also Alex has actually just added another question which is kind of linked to it, about the culture and the processes that go on at your school. and how like it all seems very research driven, and people I think are quite sort of, it sounds amazing because you've got so much research behind it, but people don't necessarily know where to go to find this stuff. So like, is there any way you could suggest at like a very practical level for people to go and find great resources, about great pieces of research around culture, around coaching, around
kind of culture, and I mean, obviously, not to be massively biased, but Claire and I's book focuses on how to build a really healthy culture through using the curriculum as a vehicle to do so. And so it opens up the conversation around the link between, moving your classroom teachers on to be informed about curriculum in order to be able to be curriculum designers in the future, but also there's quite a wealth of research around using the curriculum as a vehicle to drive professional relationships, to drive that sense of collegiate. So Vivian Robinson is a really great place to start with, looking at change management and how to have really honest conversations with people, but that are still incredibly respectful. Kim Scott's Radical Candor is a must read as well. It really focuses on, nobody wants to be told that they're doing a great job when you don't think they're doing a great job, but also we have that moral duty to bring people on so that they understand that it's okay to make mistakes, because mistakes are inevitable to learning and improving and getting better. And Kim Scott provides a really good model for that.
Great. Well, Kat, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really interesting hearing from you talk about all things sort of well-being and stuff. So yeah, really interesting. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So that basically concludes the 3 talks we've had. We've heard from Mary Myatt this morning, Sam Strickland, and now Kat Howard as the last, but by no means least, speaker. So it's been really great to hear 3 such interesting sessions. The last thing to say really is, if you have any further conversations or questions you want to ask, you can obviously get in touch with people using and sort of keep that conversation going using the Seneca CPD hashtag. So do keep that going, do keep using that, and yeah, have conversations on Twitter with anyone, and also feel free to, I'm sure Sam, Mary and Kat won't mind me saying, if you want to have any questions on what they talked about specifically, please do, tweet them, send them a message, whatever, to get in contact. But just sort of as a final thing, for those who aren't aware of what Seneca is a free online learning platform that students can log on to, and teachers, senior leaders, and also parents can help to can use to track progress of students. So if you want to have a look at what we do, it's free to create an account. So just go ahead and have a look and see what we do. But there's lots of people using it in the UK and internationally as well. So hopefully we'll be able to help you out with any challenges you're facing with delivering the remote curriculum at the moment. So last thing to say is thank you so much to everyone who's joined as a participant in this session. We've had at a peak, it was around 300 people joining to prioritise their CPD on a Saturday morning. So it's really, really brilliant to see, and really really inspiring to see so many teachers sort of wanting to get part of this and sort of getting so much out of these sessions. So yeah, it's great to have you here with us, and yeah, thanks for joining. And if you want to see this session afterwards or share it with colleagues afterwards, it's live streamed on YouTube in the Seneca CPD YouTube channel. And to access that, I'll send you a link afterwards on Monday, which you can basically have a look through and watch back any of the sessions you want. So you can then obviously share it with colleagues, or if there's any bits you missed, you can also keep up on those through the Seneca CPD YouTube channel. We'll also be doing lots of other CPD training, so keep an eye out for different things we provide. So this is one of many different conferences we offer, and the best place to look for that is on our Twitter, or if you sign up as a user on the Seneca website, you'll be able to get access through, we'll send out emails and let our users know when there are different sessions coming up. So thank you very much to, as I say, Mary, Sam and Kat. It's been a really great day, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thanks for joining.